Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I will talk about the three main strategies or approaches used by bilingual, trilingual, and multilingual families. And I'll give you lots of practical tips on how to choose the right strategy for your family and tips on how to implement it in real life. Let's get started. Let's start with the first main strategy, one parent, one language, also known as OPOL or OPOL. Just as the name suggests, OPOL or OPOL involves each parent speaking only one language to the child. So, in a two-parent household, one parent will always speak one language with the child, while the other parent will use another language. Let's look at an example. Let's say you and your partner live in England. You are a native English speaker, while your partner is a native Spanish speaker, and you want to raise your child to be bilingual in Spanish and English. In this scenario, you will speak to your child only in English, while your partner speaks to the child exclusively in Spanish. But straight away, we run into a potential problem. What about when all three of you are together, or when the parents are talking among themselves in the child's presence? Strict proponents of the OPOL approach would advise that when all three of you are talking together, each parent should still stick to their respective languages when directly addressing the child, but can switch to English, your mutual language, when you are addressing each other. Adam Beck, the author of Maximizing Your Child's Bilingual Ability, who raised his children to be bilingual in Japanese and English while living in Japan, takes a really strict approach. He and his wife avoid having lengthy conversations in Japanese in the children's presence, and he also actively avoids social gatherings which would require him to speak Japanese extensively in the children's presence too. The purpose of this rather extreme approach, he explains, is to reinforce the message that Daddy only speaks English, and therefore reinforce the need to use that language exclusively with Daddy. In reality, you might decide to just do what feels the most natural for your family. You might find it more natural for all three of you to speak in English together, for example. As long as this doesn't affect your child's ability to speak the target language, it shouldn't be a problem. If you are hoping to raise your child to be trilingual, so the majority language of your place of residence plus one target language from one parent plus another target language from the other parent, OPOL might be your best starting point. In fact, you might find yourself and your partner already practicing OPOL without even being aware of it. Since this is essentially what we as a family do, I'll use us as a real-life example. So I speak Mandarin and my husband speaks Russian. We live in the UK, where English is the majority language. Both children were born here and live in an environment where English is the majority language in all settings. I use Mandarin exclusively with the children, and my husband only uses Russian with them. The problem is that in a trilingual OPOL setup, it's often difficult to ensure that the child gets adequate exposure to each of the target languages, especially if one or both parents work full-time. I'll give you some tips on how to maximize your child's exposure to each language. Tip number 1. Make the most of the evening with your child. For two parents in full-time work, this probably amounts to 2 or 3 hours per day split between two target languages, which is not really a lot. So if you can, switch off the TV, make sure you spend lots of quality time talking to one another. Talk about your day at the dinner table. Get the kids involved in any necessary household chores. That's a great way for them to acquire the target language in a fun, natural way. Bath time and bedtime are also the perfect opportunities for some parent and child bonding and fun language learning. Aim for 15 minutes of reading before bed in your target languages. This should be one routine to stick to no matter what. Tip number 2. Consider hiring an after-school nanny, au pair, or babysitter who speaks the target language or languages. Ideally, you should have one hired person for each of your target languages, of course, to ensure even exposure to both target languages. But in reality, this might be impossible to achieve. In that case, you may need to decide which target language should take priority for your family's needs at this moment in time and really focus on making up for the neglected language on the weekend. Let's pause for a moment. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel and hitting that like button. This will really help my channel grow and help other parents like yourself find my content. Thank you so much. Now, let's move on to the second main strategy, known as minority language at home. This approach mostly applies to bilingual families. Typically, both parents speak the same minority language, and the family live in a country or region where a different language, the majority language, is spoken. So essentially, the child gets the minority language from their parents and the majority language from the outside world. As the child only has to juggle two languages and both parents speak the same minority language at home, it should in theory be easier to achieve the 30% exposure needed for language acquisition. Statistically speaking, minority language at home is a highly effective strategy for raising bilingual children. According to a number of studies, up to 70% of families who practice this approach succeed in passing on the minority language to their kids. But what happens if you find yourself among the 30% who fail to pass on the minority language to their children? This can be down to a number of reasons. Reason number one or both parents are not using the minority language consistently enough. Remember, always aim to use the target language with your child close to 100% of the time. Be really mindful about how often you use the majority language. I know how easy it is to slip into the majority language when it's literally all around you. But if you want to maximize your child's chance of success, you simply have to minimize your use of the majority language. It's as simple as that. However, if your child is already fluent, you can be far more relaxed about using the majority language as and when needed. So start monitoring your use of the majority language today if you think consistency might be an issue for your family. And then do your best to minimize the use of the majority language. Reason number two, the child is able to speak the home language at first, but gradually loses it once they start full-time nursery or school. To avoid this problem, some experts suggest delaying your child's introduction to the majority language for as long as possible. In reality, this means not sending them to a full-time majority language nursery or school until the home language is fully established, or even better, send them to a bilingual nursery or school. For many parents though, this is simply not an option. Where we used to live, most families rely on two incomes and have no choice but to send their children to nursery full-time when they turn one or even earlier. In some cases, the majority language just takes over as the child spends more and more time away from home. If this is happening to your child, first of all, be assured that it's totally normal. You should be celebrating the fact that they are learning a new language and interacting with their peers. However, it's really important to reinforce the home language as soon as you see signs of what I call majority language invasion. If your child starts using English words at home, you need to gently but firmly reassert the home language. Every time they say an English word or phrase, remind them to say it again in the home language, or at the very least repeat it in the home language yourself so they can hear the correct language input. However, if the invasion is at a more advanced stage, meaning that your child is no longer able or willing to speak the home language, you may want to consider implementing what I call the boot camp method as soon as possible before the majority language takes over completely. check out my video about how to tackle this particular problem. It's called "What Should You Do If Your Child Always Replies to You in English?" The link is in the description box below. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about the time and place approach. Using the time and place strategy, the parents would separate the languages used with the child either by time or by place, or both, which means that in theory, there's no upper limit to the number of languages that you can use. In reality, however, most parents would probably limit it to a maximum of 4 or 5 languages, which is a lot. Time and place is particularly useful if the parents want their child to be fluent in 4 or more languages, or want to gradually introduce a second, third, or fourth language. It can also be used in combination with the OPOL and or minority language at home strategy. So how does this work in practice? In my blog post and my book, I explain this in great detail with some examples, so check them out if you want to find out more. But for the purpose of this video, I'll sum it up briefly for you. For example, you and your partner are raising your child to be bilingual in English and Spanish, and you all live in England. Your child turns 3 and you decide to add a third language, Japanese. Assuming you speak the language yourself, you might decide to carve out a specific time of the day for Japanese. For example, dinner time. So every day at dinner time, you start speaking to your child in Japanese. Or you might decide to dedicate a particular place to Japanese. For example, at a Japanese playgroup. The time and place approach is very flexible, allowing for customization and can adapt to changes in circumstances. Having said that, for the time and place approach to work well, consistency is important. Once you've decided which language to use, when and where, try your best to stick to it at least until a change in circumstances demands an adjustment in your strategy. I hope you found this video helpful. For more practical tips, advice, and a step-by-step guide to helping your child become actively bilingual, trilingual, or multilingual, check out my book, Bilingual and Trilingual Parenting 101, available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon. I'll include a link to the Amazon page in the description box below. It's only 120 pages long, and you can easily read it over a weekend. It's jargon-free and jam-packed with practical tips and advice that you can implement with your child from day one. Please also share in the comments below if you have any questions about today's video, or if there are any particular topics you would like me to discuss in any future videos. Also, please like, share, and subscribe, as it will really help my channel grow. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in my next video.